Hello and welcome to Isolation, the human story of the pandemic. My name is Jody Cooper, and today I'm joined with my friend George from Alaska. Hello, George.
Hello, Jody.
George is a pilot, is that right?
Yes, I fly the Boeing 777 freighter in all cargo operations.
All right. Have any favorite trips that you do? Because I imagine you've traveled all over the place.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd say it kind of changes throughout time and how things are happening throughout the world. Something can be my favorite, and then later on, not my favorite.
All right. So, what would you say your favorite trip is at the moment?
Well, at the moment, I would have to say going to Sydney, Australia is my favorite.
Oh, cool. And on your trips, do you get much time between different flights to see any of the surrounding areas that you're going through?
Not normally. Normally, I get about 24 hours between flights, and that's actually 24 hours, on the ground in the city.
Yeah.
But once in a while, I'll get 2 or 3 or 4 days in a place, and that's nice. Then I can get out and I can visit and check things out.
Cool. The reason I've asked you to join me today, George, is I thought being a pilot, you might have quite a unique perspective on how the pandemic affected you personally.
Yeah. Okay. So when the pandemic started, or rather when lockdown started, I was out in a rural area in Alaska, in a little. I wasn't even in a village. I was in the remnants of an old village, and all that's left there is a little log cabin. And I was there helping dog mushers to come through there on as they ran the Iditarod race. And it's an 1,100-mile sled dog race across Alaska. And so this was one of they call them checkpoints, where you check in the musher and record their time and number of dogs, and the veterinarians check the dogs and all that, and you sign them out, write down what time they left.
Is the musher the thing that's attached to the dogs?
Yeah, so the dogs are attached to a rope, which is attached to a sled, and the musher then stands on the sled. Yeah. Out there was no radio communication, there was no phones, no internet, we had nothing. So I was really isolated. And I flew back into Anchorage, and when I got back in, all of a sudden, everybody's telling me about this virus, and this pandemic is starting, and the lockdowns are starting, and I'm like, what? What are you talking about? I had no clue, no idea, until I came back to civilization.
All right. So you didn't know anything that was going on in the world at that point?
Yeah. No, when you're out there like that, you're totally cut off. And,
right.
And the world could have ended and you wouldn't know.
And how long were you out in the middle of nowhere for?
I was out there for 10 days.
Okay.
Yeah. So then I had to start getting caught up on what was happening and the changes that were coming. Anchorage wasn't hit quite so hard in severe lockdowns.
Okay.
What do I want to say? The population here is maybe around 350,000, 400,000. It's pretty well spread out, and there's a lot of outdoor activities to do here, and people typically spend a lot of time outdoors.
Okay.
And so during the pandemic here in Anchorage, they made it lawful to go out of your house and go outdoors and do activities. They just wanted groups or families who lived in the same house to stay together, and that the groups then should be away from each other when they're out on the trail. So we actually got out of the house quite a bit. You could still go and grocery shop. We had the masks, and I think they limited the number of people going into stores and things like that.
Okay.
And they limited the store hours. But we weren't stuck in the house the whole time.
Yeah, that sounds like you had a real advantage over many people, especially people living in cities. Let me just get this straight. So, George, do you live in Anchorage? Because Anchorage is quite a big place, right?
Yes, I live in Anchorage. Yeah.
Okay. And so even though you live in a city, you still had quite a lot of freedom by the sounds of it.
Yes, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So they closed down all the restaurants and things like that where people would gather, and so but we could still go out, like I said, do things outdoors. And of course, they also limited, you couldn't have, people come over and visit at your house or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah, that was quite similar to here, really. Oh,
Yeah.
they limited it to I think for a while it was like that, and then they said, okay, if it's family members, they limited it to like one extra family or one extra household or whatever, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. And I typically buy surplus products for my house. So initially we were okay with supplies, and then of course eventually you get to the point, okay, we need to buy more supplies, and then it became a bit of a hassle. Things were still generally not available, sold out of a lot of things, and but we were able to eventually get all the supplies we needed, and of course get a bunch of masks. I think initially my wife had some fabric, and she was making masks,
Mm.
not just for us, but for the city as a
Well,
volunteer. They had a little organization going where people could make masks and drop them off at a central location for others.
my sister-in-law, she was making masks. They were quite nice. And then, of course, we found out later they weren't actually, didn't offer you that much protection. But I guess it was better than nothing.
Yeah, so that's how it was at home. When I went to work, however, it's a totally different story.
Okay.
So air travel at the time, you had to have an essential need to travel, first of all. And I did get a letter from the airline saying that, I'm part of an essential organization, and I need to travel for my job. And with that letter, I was able to travel to pick up the airplane, since I don't fly directly out of Anchorage. And then we would go fly around the world, drop off the airplane, and then I would travel back home. And the flights, of course, they were not quite so full anymore. They didn't book the middle seats at all. And then even the rest of the airplane, there were quite a few empty seats. And I actually liked that, because then I could stretch out more, and I don't feel so crowded. And they started cleaning. They started actually cleaning everything, really, really good, and that was really nice. Have everything super clean.
Are you trying to say that is this like a sort of a back door into the goings on of airlines? Here I was.
I think
I was interviewing George the pilot.
From my experience, it's in all industries across the world. It just, you go into a restaurant and you're like, okay, the menu is sticky and the table is sticky, and you're like, there's food on the bench, and you're like, and they tell you, oh, I just cleaned that. Really? Okay. So yeah, I'm sure you've traveled on passenger planes, and you're like, geez, did they really clean this? But during the pandemic, they really did. I mean, it was really nice. And so every time we entered a new country, we had to get tested for COVID. Right. And the nurses were right there at the airport, in the airport. A lot of times they'd be like in the baggage area. They'd have a whole area set up with all the test facilities and whatnot. And then, they wouldn't test you on the way out. Just sometimes we would test on the way out, but it was a pre-test for entering the next country. Okay. And then they would test you again when you got there. So the testing kind of almost got out of control. It was test before you get on the plane, and then test again when you get off the plane.
I'm like, it's interesting you should say that, because I remember hearing some stories on the news of some people who had tested negative before they went on probably a long-haul flight. And then by the time they got to the other end, there was a whole bunch of people who were suddenly positive. So maybe that was the reason.
Yeah, I was reading about it, and they were saying it has to do with how you swab your nose. And if you swab it in the wrong areas, you can get a negative result. So perhaps it's the way that the person is testing. Yeah. And of course, we had to wear masks. And initially, they wanted the N95 masks, and they were so uncomfortable. They were these white masks with these heavy metal tab that bends around your nose.
I know exactly the one you mean.
Yeah, they have two of the straps around your head, And yeah, that hurt my nose unbelievably. And I remember thinking initially, man, I just felt like I couldn't breathe normally
Oh,
wearing it. I felt like I was suffocating.
oh. Yeah, probably not a good thing to experience
Yeah,
in the air.
yeah, yeah.
So did you have to
And
wear
then
the?
eventually
Sorry.
I think most of the countries eventually let us just wear the surgical masks, and those were a lot more comfortable.
Yeah. No.
Uh,
And so did
but
you
I
have
think
to wear your masks for the entire flight?
no, we just had to wear them when we were off the airplane.
Okay. Phew. Well, that's a relief.
Yeah. So, like I said, we were able to wear the surgical masks in most countries, except for China. They stuck with the N95
Mm,
throughout the whole thing. But we would wear them like as soon as before you even opened the airplane door, you had to put the masks on. Then you could
right.
open the door. Then you come out and go through you would they would drive you from the airplane to the airport terminal, and then you would go to the nurses and do your COVID check-in.
Mm.
Um, and then they would take you to the hotel. And at the hotel, of course, you're isolated also.
Yeah.
You can't go out, buy any food or anything. There were some cases in where they would have food delivered to your door, and in other cases, you could order it yourself.
Mm. And was
Um,
there any
so
times when you were on one of your journeys where you landed in a country and someone tested positive, either one of the crew or whatever?
yeah, that never happened on any of my flights, but it did happen. So they were isolated. They were taken to what do you call it, a COVID um, hotel for people
Mm-hmm.
who test positive.
Right.
And of course, they had to wait. Their 10 days. I think initially it was 14 days that they had to wait,
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
and then you had to test positive for like 3 more days after that or something.
Mm.
And that disrupted the airline schedule quite a bit because they ended up isolating the whole crew,
Oh,
even though not all of them tested positive.
okay.
And then the ones that were positive, like I said, they had to stay at least the 14 days. And then the others, I think they let them go, but I can't remember how long they
Mm.
held them. Maybe just 2 or 3 days. And so after that, then the airline decided, okay, everybody's going to take a COVID test before you depart the U.S.
Right.
So then we had to start doing that because they wanted to make sure nobody's going to test positive when you get to another country.
Yeah.
So that seemed to work okay. So I think Hong Kong became the worst stop for us because it actually became so bad we didn't stop there anymore.
Oh,
It was completely unacceptable to the airline management even. They said, no, we're not putting our flight crews through this process that you've got. They wanted us to go in and take a COVID test and then stand there in a little cubicle and wait for the test result
oh.
at the airport, and then you could continue to the hotel. Yeah, and we said, no, we're not doing that. That's crazy. So we ended up just bypassing. We would land in Hong Kong, and drop off freight, pick up freight, and refuel, but we'd stay on the airplane.
Okay.
So then we decided to overnight in Japan.
Uh-huh.
So it's only a short flight, 3.5 hour flight over to Japan.
Mm-hmm.
So we started overnighting over there because the Japanese were much more accommodating. They said, yeah, we're not going to make you do things like that. Do your
Phew.
test, go to the hotel right away and isolate. So it made our day a bit longer, having to go through there and not stop. But fortunately, your rest stop was only 3.5 hours away. So,
Yeah.
but I want to say Sydney was the next worst stop.
Oh, really?
So they would have the police there at the airport terminal, right by the nurses.
Uh-huh.
And when you came in, you actually would check in with the police first, give them your immigration form, and talk about what flight you came in on, what time you landed, when you're leaving, and then you would go do your COVID test, and then you would go back to the police, and then they would decide where they're going to put you, and they
Oh,
would split up the crews too.
okay.
And it shouldn't make sense to me because we're all coming back to the same airplane. But anyway, so you would never know what hotel you were staying at, and then they
Oh,
would escort you out to a van, or bus, and then they would drive you to a hotel, and then you had to stay on the bus until another police officer came out of the hotel and came in the bus and said, "Okay, you can come out and come in the hotel." And you would come in the hotel, and there would be no hotel people. They weren't there.
Oh,
And out in the main lobby, there were all these fold-up tables set up, and the police were sitting there, and they had this whole thing set up with all their computers and whatnot, and you would check in with the police, and they would assign you a room, and they would give you an envelope full of masks, and then a police officer would escort you to the elevator, ride in the elevator with you,
okay.
escort you to your room, and the police officer had your key for your room. And the officer would then open the door, you would go in, and they would close the door and take the key with them. And they tell you don't come out for however long you're there.
And how long were you there for?
Oh, yeah, of course. We were there 2 or 3 days, right? Never 24 hours. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, my. And the hotels varied a lot in their treatment of you. Some were really bad. They would not give you a choice on what kind of food you wanted to eat. They would just put food by your door, but they wouldn't knock on the door, and they wouldn't tell you when the food is there. And then when you would call, they'd say, "Oh, well, did you check?" And then you go look, and then there's some cold food there. And sometimes it was like a giant turkey leg in a bowl of grease that was totally solidified and ice cold. And I'm like, "What? I'm not eating that." So sometimes I would go hungry, and it was horrible. And fortunately, I had some snacks with me that I could eat. But in other hotels, we actually had a menu, and you could actually go on the internet and say, "I would like this food," and they would even have times, and they would say, "Okay, during what hours, what time of the day do you want this delivered?" And you weren't allowed to open the window in your room either.
Okay.
They had stickers on there saying that's a breach of protocol if a security breach if you open the window, even though you're like 7 stories up. Who are you going to infect? But still, they're like, "No, don't open the window."
Perhaps the passing bird.
I know. Yeah, it was crazy. So yeah, you really got got tired of being in a hotel room, and and you just want some fresh air, and you want to get out, and you can't. Yeah.
Oh.
And of course, you had to put your mask on before you opened the door to your hotel room to even look for the food, and there was a police officer sitting in a chair in the hallway, watching to see if you came out of your room with your mask off. They were ready to get you on anything.
Oh wow, that's pretty strict.
It was very extreme. Yeah, that was the worst place I think we had to go to.
It's Sydney. Oh. Well, if there's ever another world pandemic, God forbid, then I know never to go to Sydney.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. It's almost like if it wasn't for the seriousness of the event, it would sound like some sort of comedy film, perhaps with Steve Martin or something like that. Planes, trains, and automobiles, or something like that, and hotel rooms.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh man.
And it was almost like the police were they were on those particular days. They were serving as hotel staff.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and I talked to one of the police officers there, and he said he hated the whole thing. He didn't like having to do this work. He didn't feel like it was police work, but for some reason the government decided the police are going to handle all of this. And
okay.
So they didn't want to be there either. Yeah.
Oh, well, I guess it beats doing a whole load of paperwork. But then again, sitting around waiting for someone to break protocol is also not much fun.
No.
Because I'm guessing after a while, most people just didn't bother trying to do it. It was more hassle than it was worth to come out of your hotel room without a mask on.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I'd be very interested to know what would happen in those instances if you just forgot to put your mask on. Would they? Because they couldn't obviously surround you because that would be dangerous.
Yeah, I think. Well, I heard about some breaches in protocol like that, and I think I'm trying to remember what they said. I think maybe they fined the person.
Right.
You had to pay a certain amount of money or something like that. Yeah.
Well, I'm guessing you were a good boy, George, and you didn't do anything naughty like that.
No, didn't get any fines.
Very good, very good.
Yeah, it's a good thing I don't smoke because I can't even imagine a smoker was stuck in a hotel room and you can't smoke in the room. You set off the fire alarm. So,
Yeah.
and for how many days? Yeah,
And you're not allowed to smoke on the plane either. So it's not like there would have been anywhere for them to smoke.
exactly right. Yeah, there would
What would
have been
you do?
nowhere.
I can
Yeah,
imagine there must have been some very fraught freight pilots during those times.
I think so. Uh, uh, Fortunately, all the ones that I flew with didn't smoke either. So,
Uh,
but,
I bet they were wishing they could give up at that time.
I'm sure. Yeah, there probably were a lot of people who gave up smoking during the pandemic.
Or they became chain smokers after the fact.
Yeah, yeah. So we did a lot of video calls, my family and I, and we still do a lot of video calls when I'm at work. Call from the hotels and chat. And when I was home, yeah, we would do a lot of games, board games, card games, and things.
Yeah.
In addition to going out hiking or skiing or something.
Mm.
And we did Zoom. Yeah, Zoom became a new thing. Everybody was on Zoom then. After that, if you
Yeah.
wanted to attend any event or function or a class, it was always on Zoom. So I started learning to use that, and that became the new way to visit other people.
I do wonder,
And
did Zoom exist before the pandemic? It must have done, but I certainly had never heard of it before the pandemic.
yeah, I hadn't heard of it either. It probably did, but it wasn't as popular as as it is now.
It's funny.
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know who promoted it because I knew about Skype for like at least 15 or so years before the pandemic, and I was using that on and off. And then the pandemic came along, and then everyone was using Zoom, and I was thinking, what happened to Skype? What was wrong with Skype? I don't really know the difference, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I know you could have a lot of people on Zoom at the same time, and you could see. It was really handy because you could see a video of everybody who was connected
Mhm.
in your event, and you could see the list of people, and you could see their cameras, and everybody could talk at the same time, or they could mute, and one person could talk. It was, and they could add music and videos. So it worked out pretty good.
I guess Zoom's a bit more interactive than Skype. I mean,
Yeah,
Skype got better,
maybe that's
but
it.
I'm guessing Zoom has more features, and that's maybe
Yeah,
what made it so popular.
yeah. I think it probably was better for larger groups. Yeah.
Mm. So,
So
would you say the pandemic affected your family at all? Because it sounds like you had quite a lot of freedom, but was there anything specifically during the pandemic which affected your family?
well, they got tired of being stuck in one city. So they really missed traveling around the world. So as soon as the lockdowns were lifted, we were on the airplane out of here, off on a vacation. Quick, hurry!
We don't care where. Just let me get
It
out
was
of
like I think they called it a revenge vacation. I need this now. Um, so we went off to Hawaii right away,
Nice.
and that was early during the release of the lockdowns, and they still had, you had to do a health declaration form. You still had to do a COVID test before you could go, you know. And I think Hawaii had a whole app that had everything in it, and you had to fill out all these forms. And they even gave us little bracelets to wear on the airplane and in the airport in Hawaii to show that we completed all our paperwork.
Okay.
It
Oh.
was quite a feat to get there, but we made it. And they were still partially locked down there in Hawaii at the time too. So
When would this
most
be?
things were open, but not everything.
2021?
This would have been, yeah, I'm trying to remember when. Yeah, probably would have been 21. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I can't remember which month now.
Probably would have been the summer, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I want to say like May, but it could have been, it could have been June.
Uh-huh.
But so we still had to wear masks there. but it was good. We still had a lot of fun, and there were still most things were open. So we did that, and then eventually we got to be able to visit other people in our city again. And I know that, see, my parents also live in the same city, and we could bring things over to their house and put it on their front porch, and then tell them, okay, we put it there, and then we would leave, and then they would come grab it, or vice versa. They would do that for us,
Okay.
so that we were still isolating, but we could give each other things. So we helped to do some shopping for them, things like that.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And like I said, we started playing a lot more board games and card games and things. We actually learned some games online, some interactive games for the families. Like people can put in pictures, and then when the game starts, you have to guess which person in the family put that picture in there. Which is quite hard when you're dealing with four members of the same family, because a lot of times we would share photos between each other.
I'd imagine
ahead of time.
more than one of them could have had that same photo.
Yeah, exactly. So it made it quite fun trying to guess who actually took the photo. Things like that.
I wonder if there were some times where no one could remember who taken that photo.
Yeah.
Were you personally affected by the pandemic? Like any members of your family or friends, did they get ill?
So I had to get vaccinated. It was a requirement of my job, and I had to have the booster shot. And my family decided to go ahead and get vaccinated too, so and get the booster shot. So all four of us ended up doing that. But it's hard to say whether any of us had COVID at any time. There were times when people were sick, but it was just regular cold symptoms, and it didn't last very long. So it just felt like somebody had a cold for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
And that was about it. So maybe not. We don't really know.
Was Anchorage hit quite bad by the pandemic? Or it sounds to me like you got off pretty well.
I can't remember the numbers on how many people had COVID here. The numbers came up, a bit. It was definitely here, but I don't remember anyone dying from it here. But that's not to say that someone didn't. I just can't remember that. But certainly a lot of people had it here.
Yeah.
But they had all the facilities set up. They had multiple testing locations and all that, and of course they made everything free. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was really good.
Yeah, they had all kinds of different facilities that took over to give COVID tests and vaccinations and things. They even had just a mobile home in a parking lot at a school. And you would just go to the parking lot and they would test you right there.
Oh, that's cool.
But it certainly made me more cognizant of all how easily it is to get a virus, and when you're out in public. So I started using a stylus now when I'm out in public. So you always come across a computer screen that's been touched by 5 million people, and so I get out my pen and I'm and for the most part it works. Once in a while I'll have a little trouble. The screen won't read the pen, but most of the time I can just use the pen and tap and swipe with it.
Cool. You're the first person I've heard from who's done that before. I'm sure you're not the only person who's thought up of a solution like that for avoiding touching the screens, but you're certainly the first one I've heard. So good idea.
Yeah. And I don't wear a mask anymore. Once in a while I see people still wearing a mask on passenger flights. But for the most part, I figure I'm vaccinated. I've got my booster shot, and seems like most people are. And I don't know. Once in a while, you hear somebody coughing or sneezing on an airplane, but it's just so far we haven't had anything more than just regular cold symptoms in our family. So
I've heard from other people that the numbers are on the rise again, and that some of the symptoms are actually getting worse again. I think I had my booster, and I think I've got maybe a second booster, and that's it for me now. I don't think I'll get another one. I'm being boosted enough. Because the thing is, you never whatever booster you get, it's always for the one before, so it's not going to protect you from the most recent one. So yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not planning to get any more boosters either. I'm like, well,
Mm.
I've got plenty. We'll see how things go. And I feel like, like you said, there's always one more.
Yeah.
It's just like even with I remember with the hepatitis shots. They're like, oh, you got to get this hepatitis. We have this A now. And then
Yeah.
okay, and we get that, and then oh no, now there's a B, and then okay, you get that. Oh, now there's a C. I mean, it just goes on and on.
Well, you must be, as a pilot, you must be quite used to having to get vaccinations for certain destinations. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, generally, my vaccinations were all, at a younger age, for schools.
Yeah.
And, really, I'd say mostly it's African countries that require you to have other vaccinations that you might not have got when you were a kid, but it don't generally fly to Africa. So,
Okay.
and I think it's kind of changed even now, though.
So was there any positive things or changes that came out of the pandemic for you?
Well, like I said, it just, making you more aware of how to protect yourself from picking up, viruses out in public. I'd say that was a positive change for me. And I don't know, I guess it just makes the family feel more like you need to take advantage of the time you have to go out and travel and do things. Because you never know when things are going to shut down. Yeah. Like I said, the cleanliness during the pandemic was outstanding. And even especially when the restaurants first opened after the lockdowns were lifted, and you went in, the restaurants were so clean. I mean, nothing was sticky anymore. There was no food anywhere. It was amazing. And and they were like, we're going to open half capacity. And so you didn't have to sit right next to somebody else, and they would spread people out throughout the room, and everything was super clean. We really enjoyed it. Of course, now it didn't last very long, though, because now that those restrictions have been lifted, now you go in the restaurants and it's not quite as clean as it was before.
Yeah.
But it was nice while it lasted. Yeah.
Of course. I mean, the hospitality industry was one of the industries that was really badly affected.
Yeah.
George, did you take up any new hobbies or learn new skills during the pandemic?
Like I said, we did a lot more outdoor activities. So we really picked up on that. We would go cross country skiing, downhill skiing in the winter. In summer, we would go on hikes and kayaking and on the lakes and things like that. And we started, like I said, we started playing a lot more board games and card games and online games, with the family. Even if I wasn't home, we could still do things online. So, but that's really it. I really didn't pick up a specific new hobby.
I'm still waiting for a good answer to this question. I'm going to keep asking it. I'm sure someone will come up with something really crazy one of these days.
Really crazy? My new hobby. Yeah.
So would you say your life is different now since the pandemic in any way?
Well, yeah, like I said, just more aware of cleanliness out in public, and like I said, using a stylus and screens and things, and just trying to, I'll use my coat sleeve a lot of times to open doors and stuff instead of touching the doorknob.
Yeah, I've done that sometimes.
Yeah, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's definitely on my mind now all the time. So yeah, something that'll never be forgotten.
Yeah.
I think one of the last restrictions to be lifted in Sydney was wearing masks on public transportation, and buses and trains. And when I was riding trains around Sydney wearing my mask, and I look around, and I would say 50% of the people on there were wearing masks, and 50% were not.
Yeah.
Even though we were supposed to all be wearing them.
Yeah, I think that was happening all over the place. Well, George, I know you have to go. Thank you very much, George, for joining me today, and wish you the best of health.
Great, yeah. Thank you for inviting me, and it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, lovely speaking to you too, George.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you to you, the audience, for tuning into this podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you would like to get involved, simply head on over to my website, jodycoopermusic.com, click on the Contact tab, leave your details there, and I'll get back in touch with you.
If you would like to take part in a funny pandemic-related quiz, simply click on the tab What's Your Story on my website. There you can answer various questions, and if you manage to get all the questions right, at the end you can win a prize from me. If you would like to find out more about me and my music, you can also join my mailing list from my website. All you have to do is leave your details, and as a special thank you, I will send you 5 of my original songs, plus 5 videos which explain the meaning behind those songs. In my next episode, I'll be talking to my friend and fellow singer-songwriter Omi Golmer about his experiences during the pandemic. So make sure you tune in for that. Bye for now.